Corfe Castle dominates the horizon of England's south coast. Its huge ruin stands as a constant reminder of the past, a reminder of civil war, of murder, and of opulence. Corfe Castle dates back to the 11th century and was built by William the Conqueror, also known as William I, after his successful victory against Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings. As well as establishing a fortification in the area, William also enjoyed to hunt inside the royal forest of Purbeck. However, before the Norman conquest, on the 18th of March 978, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle details that Edward the Martyr, who was King of England at the time, was murdered whilst visiting Ethelred on the mound where Corfe Castle stands. Contemporary accounts state that the king was ambushed and cruelly assassinated by the servants of his father's second wife. After this, Edward's stepbrother, Ethelred the Unready, eventually ruled England. Around the time of the Norman conquest, it was normal practice to create a wooden keep on top of a mound of earth. These castles were known as Motte and Bailey castles. These wholly wooden structures would be quick to erect in roughly 6 months. A motte was the name of the hill which a keep was placed upon, and the bailey was an enclosed area of land within the castle walls where soldiers would live. Unusually for fortifications built in the 11th century, Corfe was partially constructed from stone, showing that it was a castle of high status. Archaeologists have suggested that the stone keep was built during William's reign. However, some historians date it to 1105 and the reign of William's third son, Henry I. The keep would grow at a rate of 3 to 4 metres a year and took over a decade to finish using Purbeck limestone quarried from the local area. Later on, the castle would grow to become a huge, impregnable fortress which would dominate the local skyline and act as a symbol of the king's might and power. In 1139, under the reign of King Stephen, England was plunged into civil war, and it was during this time that Corfe was stood as siege by the king. Tensions in England were rife during the time of Stephen's reign, with him challenging the bloodline to the throne, usurping Henry I's daughter, Matilda. It is thought that Stephen's forces built a siege castle to siege and starve the castle into submission. Under the reigns of King John and Henry III, the castle began to grow to an even bigger structure. During the reign of John, Corfe was used to imprison John's enemies, including even his own niece. His niece was treated relatively well, however the French knights she was captured with were thrown into the deep dungeons and starved to death. It was during this time too that Corfe Castle became a place of execution. Peter de Pomfrey was seen as a prophet, and he claimed a prophecy that foretold the end of King John's reign. Outraged, John ordered that de Pomfrey would be dragged along the ground by horses for miles before being hanged. John also brutally ordered that the prophet's son should be hung with him. With Corfe being John's favourite castle, he extended to a huge extent, building an ornate and opulent gloriette upon the high ground. Inside here, John would keep treasure and entertain, and it was an excellent example of medieval architecture. John's reign ended with him losing a large portion of his power with the formation of the Magna Carta. However, the impression he left upon Corfe Castle still remains today. Henry III, John's son, carried on John's work. He replaced the last remaining wooden palisades or fencing with stone fortifications and carried out repairs to the keep. He also created 3 new towers, the first, the Horseshoe, and the Plunkenet Towers, the former being named after Constable of the Tower during 1264–70. Corfe Castle remained a royal fortress until it was sold by Elizabeth I in 1572 to her Lord Chancellor and possible suitor, Sir Christopher Hatton. It was during this time that Hatton produced the earliest surviving survey of the castle. Corfe was transitioning into a castle of great importance and a sign of riches and links to royalty. In 1635, the castle was bought by Sir John Banks, and it was the Banks family that would usher in the most savage and destructive periods in Corfe's history. When the Civil War broke out in England, most of Dorset was under the control of Parliament and Oliver Cromwell. However, whilst John Banks was in Oxford with the King, King Charles I, the castle was to support the King. During this time, the castle was frequented by John's wife Mary and her children. The parliamentarians, however, wanted to control the huge fortification, so a siege began of Corfe Castle. The parliamentarians gave orders that anyone who supported Mary Banks would have their houses burnt down. Corfe initially was only defended by 5 people, and Lady Banks was able to smuggle food into the castle. She also managed to grow the defending garrison to 80 soldiers. The parliamentarians had around 500 to 600 soldiers. They tried to use battering rams to try and smash the gates, however these proved ineffectual. When the soldiers tried to storm the walls, They were met by Mary and her daughters throwing burning coals and heavy stones from the high walls onto their heads. The siege went on for 6 weeks, and eventually Lady Banks was relieved by Royalist forces. Mary Banks still refused to give up control of Corfe Castle. However, sneaky tactics allowed the parliamentarians to eventually take the fortification. On the night of February 26, 1646, a defector, Colonel Pitman, opened a back door. Disguised as royalists, 120 parliamentarians occupied the castle. It was then that finally Lady Banks would surrender. However, the parliamentarian commander, Colonel Bingham, formally handed her the castle keys and seals as a mark of respect for her resilience, courage, and bravery. In March 1646, it was voted upon and decided in Parliament that Corfe Castle should be slighted and demolished. It is with this destruction that has left the castle in its ruins of which we see today. Because of the pure size and solidity of the castle walls, a complete demolition of Corfe Castle would have been impractical and impossible. The castle was pillaged with stone, lead and wooden timber, finding its place in the houses and homes of the wealthier cottagers in the area. What strikes you when walking around Corfe is the amount of gunpowder that must have been used to destroy the castle and the keep. The walls are extremely thick, and one must imagine what it would have been like to have been one of those besieging soldiers. You stood absolutely no chance at trying to penetrate the castle's walls. Following the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, the Banks family managed to regain much of their property and estates. Instead of rebuilding Corfe, they decided to build a different house in Dorset. Upon his death, Henry John Ralph Banks gave the entire Banks family estate to the National Trust, which included Corfe Castle, lots of the village Corfe, and other areas of land and property. For over 900 years, a castle has stood overlooking the Isle of Purbeck at Corfe, intimidating anyone who is in the area. It has seen much development, sieges, and action throughout the years. The castle was once a favourite of the king. However, today, it stands as a monument of great architecture, political treachery, and destruction.